Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariah Earhart. I am with the University of Arizona Center for Rural Health. Welcome to the webinar series. While we have people joining, I would just like to take a minute to express our gratitude to our partners, the Arizona Telemedicine Program and the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center. Next slide. Some quick notes for this webinar. The audience will be muted for the webinar, but we encourage you to enter questions into the chat box throughout the webinar. At the end of the webinar, a survey will pop up, and we would like you to take a moment to complete it. It really helps to have your feedback so we can continue to improve your experience. And with that, I will hand it over to Janet.
Thank you so much, Mariah, and I'd like to welcome everyone on behalf of the Arizona Telemedicine Program and Southwest Telehealth Resource Center. We've been partners with the Arizona Center for Rural Health really since the beginning of our program over 25 years ago and have worked hard to sow the seeds of telehealth throughout Arizona and the Southwest. And I would like to welcome you on behalf of our entire team, and thank you for joining us today. We would like to continue to share resources as a telehealth resource center, and no matter where you're joining us from today, there is a telehealth resource center that serves you, that can help you find potential grant partners, can help you with your grant, perhaps even with letters of support. Today's program is really about helping you write award-winning grants. And we've been working with Learn, Design, Apply Incorporated for several years to help folks in Arizona do just that. And we have had folks win some amazing grants, including our USDLT, which we'll spend a lot of time on today. I wanted to also begin by saying that, again, no matter where you're from, there are some amazing grants out there, whether it's your local grocery chain or foundations or your state or your county. There are some great opportunities. And I think it's important to think about what opportunities are a good match for you. And again, look up that Telehealth Resource Center. The National Library of Medicine also has great grants, and they've got a great webinar on how to get one of their grants. And so I'll be sharing a PDF today in chat along with posting it with the archive that'll share some of those resources, both local and national. There'll also be a PDF inviting you to a very exciting upcoming events, as well as, of course, we'll post the PDF from our presenters today with our archive, and we'll share that link with you as well. So again, thanks for joining us, and a special thanks to our presenters. We're so fortunate that we've had this friendship and collegiality as a resource center with the folks from Learn, Design, Apply Incorporated. And I love this slide, Mariah. This is just beautiful. And Victoria Fine and Megan Beresford have been joining us and helping us cultivate great grants here in Arizona for several years. They are both employed by Learn, Design, Apply Inc. Victoria is a funding strategist, and she helps with governmental organizations, and organizations find different grants that line up with their initiatives. And then Megan, we're very fortunate to also have with us today. She has a great expertise with broadband as well as tribes and internet service providers. They both together bring us a great breadth of knowledge, and really can't thank them enough for joining us. And on with the show. And our archive will be the gift that keeps giving. If you didn't make it, or if you know someone who missed this that might enjoy the information, please do send them to our website, and we'll post that link in chat. So thanks again for joining us, and on with the show.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction. Thank you to the Arizona Center for Rural Health, the Arizona Telemedicine Program, and the Southwest TRC for having us today. Megan and I are always so happy to present to you all. We have some really exciting grant opportunities to talk to you about today. But as we're getting started, I just want to say, we'll probably be using up, I would say, the majority of the hour. If you have to drop for any reason, you have something else going on, please still reach out to us. Like we said, we'll be sharing these resources will all be shared with you afterwards. But if you would just like to reach out to Megan or myself or both of us just to have a conversation, we would love to do that with you. So just having our emails here at the beginning. If you do not have time to stick around, but know that, again, we'll be talking through, here we go, objectives and agenda. We'll be talking through a few different grants today. We're going to start off with the USDA Rural Utility Service Distance Learning and Telemedicine Grant, or the REST-DLT. We're expecting this one to come out very soon, so this is a very timely discussion, and hopefully you'll get a lot of great information on this grant program from our presentation today. And then I'll be turning it over to Megan to talk about BEAD funding and Digital Equity Act, or DEA funding. We'll be spending the rest of the session on that. And again, we'll probably use up the full hour, but Megan and I are going to stick around after that. So if you want to have a discussion, if you have lengthy, difficult questions, we might try to save those until the end, but also feel free to chat in your questions throughout, and anything that makes sense to address as we're going through the presentation, we're happy to do that. So really quick, I know we had a great introduction already, but I do just want to take a moment to introduce you to the organization that Megan and I work for, Learn, Design, Apply. We are a grant consulting and management firm. And simply put, we help organizations get funding. We focus on, I would say, federal and state programs typically, but we really look at funding kind of all across the board. We play matchmaker when it comes to grants. There is a bit of a matchmaking process involved with grants. The first thing we do is we just try to get to know you as an organization, your goals, your initiatives, where you're at, where you want to be. And we try to find funding programs that are going to fit what you're looking to do, and programs that you would actually be competitive for. And then from there, we have a lot of different services that we could offer. A lot of times it depends on the project and the scope of what you're looking to do. But no matter what, we're always happy to talk to people, to educate them on funding, and hope that we have a way of working together. And I just want to highlight, we actually counted this up as an organization recently. Since we were formed, we've helped our customers win over $720 million of funding, and that is growing all the time as more and more programs announce their awards. So, you know, I guess it's a little bit of a not so humble brag, but we would love to help you if we can. And again, just to share knowledge when possible. So we thank you all again just for being here and for having this conversation with us. Now, I know we were already introduced, but Megan and I gathered some fun facts about ourselves. And Megan actually wrote both of these, but I feel like she captured me perfectly. So just a little two fun facts, I guess, is I speak Russian. That was actually my first language. And I love K-pop, or Korean pop music. So if anybody wants to chat about that in addition to grants, I would love to do that with you. And then Megan also wrote her fun fact, but that just makes it better. So she has allegedly won the best wrong answer in a national crossword puzzle competition 3 different years. She has medals, and I've seen these medals, but there we go. I've only seen 2, so I don't know if the third one's still a rumor. So
I'm wearing
she
both
has
of
at
them.
least 2. Perfect.
You're making me question my entire history. After you mentioned this,
Well,
Vicky, I was like, did I win 3?
you have to put facts into your grant application. So good to do that always. And Megan has to wear those now the rest of the session. But again, we hope to make this fun and engaging today because, you know, we will be talking about some very serious things, and grants can be a little dry sometimes, but hopefully, again, this is an exciting and engaging discussion that we have. So starting off, like I said, we're going to talk through this USDA REST-DLT grant. And again, it's a bit of a mouthful, but this is what it stands for. It's a program that's all about distance learning and or telemedicine. And it focuses on what it defines as interactive, real-time distance learning or telemedicine. We'll get into the details of that in a few. But basically, the goal of the program is to use oftentimes technology to enable healthcare services and educational services in very, very rural communities where it would be very challenging to get these services otherwise. The program hopes to bridge the digital divide through these, highly interactive technologies, again, that enable these kinds of communications. A few unique things about this program. It's been around for a very long time. It's been around since the 90s and it keeps coming back. So this is hopefully something that will continue well into the future and something that you can look at, if not just for this year, maybe for something in the future. In recent years, this program has been coming out roughly annually. And again, it's a long-standing recurring grant. So something that, again, you can consider potentially if I'll tell you in a bit, but this grant's coming very soon. If this year is a little too fast for you, again, hopefully something you can think about for the future. And another really neat thing, especially if you're familiar with a lot of funding and especially healthcare funding, it could be hard to be eligible, just to, kind of meet the eligibility criteria to be able to apply. And some grants require a certain number of partnerships, or they might require that a certain percentage of partners be in rural areas. With this grant, it's pretty open-ended in terms of who can apply. There's only a few restrictions. Even for-profit businesses can apply. Organizations that aren't rural themselves can apply and oftentimes do because they tend to be the ones that have, the most educational resources, the most healthcare resources just available in their communities. And they still go after this funding because they want to share these resources out with rural areas. So very many different ways that you can approach this grant. And again, very many different types of organizations that are eligible, which is also great if you're thinking about partners. You can go after this grant yourself, but it might make sense to have partners. And again, it's very flexible and open in terms of who you can work with. So jumping into some details of the grant. The first thing I'm going to talk through is project design and scoring. Definitely today and just generally when we talk about grants, like I said, we want to make sure that you're competitive for a program and that you're really thinking about that as you're approaching a grant. Because, to be honest, it might not be worth your time to invest a bunch of, effort into putting together a grant application if you're unlikely to be funded. So with this grant and any other grant, always good to think about, how are we actually being scored and how do we set up a project? So typically with the RUST DLT, the way that you set up a project and determine competitiveness is you will typically be connecting locations to one another or potentially connecting them to a hub site. And a hub can be urban or rural. A hub can be anywhere essentially. And you're connecting these places together in order to share content and share resources. So potentially you have multiple rural healthcare clinics connecting to one another and maybe sharing specialists, or maybe you have a bunch of clinics and medical centers connecting to a university for continued medical education. That's also an option. And maybe the university, again, is in a big city, and that's perfectly fine so long as that university wants to use its resources and apply for this grant and use grant funding to bring information out into rural communities. There is also an option with this grant to connect with mobile units, so potentially ambulances, mobile learning stations, or even individuals in their homes for telemedicine or distance learning to the home. It just depends on where everybody is located. Basically, this grant is like what you hear on like the real estate shows a lot. Location, location, location is everything for this grant. The physical location of your sites, of where you are, if you're a service provider, of the locations of who you're trying to bring services to are going to be really key in determining if you're eligible and competitive. And again, we'll dive into the details of that in just a bit, but just know this grant really, again, it cares about locations, and that's one of the key things for determining competitiveness. On to budget and expenditures. So just some basic things you should know about this program. It's a 3-year grant, typically. There is a match that is again, typically required from this grant. It's 15% of the federal request, which ends up being about 13% of your total project costs. And historically, at least in recent years, you can request between $50,000 all the way up to $1 million under this grant. So if you factor in that match, where the match has to be 15% of your grant amount, that means that your total project budget can be between 57.5 thousand all the way up to 1.15 million. And that is for the full 3-year grant period. So it's not like up to $1 million a year. It's $1 million for the full 3-year grant period. And like I said, this grant is really focused on technology that enables live interactive distance learning or telemedicine. So that's what your grant budget has to go towards. Typically, it's going to be hardware. It might be video conferencing hardware, connectivity hardware, software, and then associated services like think installation, maintenance for the equipment, training on how to use the equipment, all of that will, again, make this interactive distance learning or telemedicine possible. And as far as timing, we are truly, I would say, expecting this grant to open up any day now. We actually thought it might come out at the end of 2023, but that has not happened yet. They have not fully announced all of the winners of this grant program from last cycle. So until that happens, we're probably not going to see the new program yet. But we hear they're almost done with that. So hopefully within, it might even be the next few weeks, they announce the winners from the 2023 round and they open up the 2024 round. Once the grant does open up, again, historically, based on recent years, the grant cycle is typically just 60 days. So it is pretty quick, but great thing about this grant, it's been around for a really long time. It does not change very much from year to year. So it's totally possible to do, I would say a great majority of the work, even on the true application. Like you can even start writing parts of your application now prior to the 2024 program officially opening, because again, you can use last year's guidance for a lot of the elements. And like I said, this grant recurs. So even if you're at like a DLT off season, think, the summer, think basically any time other than the next couple of months, you can still be thinking about this grant throughout the year and kind of prepping for the next release, the next cycle. So jumping into budget items, this is definitely, again, one of the unique elements of this grant. Some grants are really broad and will fund all kinds of things, anything that's necessary for making the project a reality. This grant, it's very broad in how it defines distance learning and telemedicine. We'll get to that in a bit, but it's very specific in terms of what you can actually put into your budget, like what counts as an eligible cost under this grant program. And again, very high level, it's going to be the technology that enables the telemedicine or the educational experience. And we have some examples of things listed here. Historically, we see a lot of video conferencing systems in this grant, and think, very high quality, video conferencing systems that will last a long time, that will be as as good as possible to being there in person. So think like really, really crisp images, really good audio quality. If the telemedicine session is all you can have in a community, like how can we make that the best telemedicine session essentially possible with modern technologies? It loves highly interactive, high quality technologies. This is not a grant where they really want you to skimp and just get by. They really want to invest in things that are, again, high quality, that will last for a long time and be very collaborative. A new thing, so if you're familiar with this grant, they kind of slowly, I feel like, introduce new costs, if not every year, every few years. Last year, they introduced cybersecurity as an eligible expenditure. We've heard a lot of requests for this, and the grant program folks seem to be listening. So they had that last year as an eligible cost, which is great, especially if you're maybe working with partners. Like, again, if you're doing telemedicine or even educational services with external groups, you probably want to make sure your cybersecurity is very solid to not open you up to vulnerabilities. So it's great that that is now being allowed. Historically, this isn't a great grant for broadband related expenditures. That's Megan's specialty. This grant, it will fund, think modems and routers and switches, like things like that work great under this program, but this isn't necessarily a program for, getting a bunch of fiber installed in a community. You can have some of those costs included here. Historically, it's up to 20% of your budget can go towards true like broadband infrastructure related expenditures. But since it's a, up to $1 million grant, think of it as, whatever $200,000 worth of broadband related costs can cover. Probably a last mile fiber connection, something like that could maybe work. But again, it's not something for really revamping the broadband connectivity in a neighborhood. Cloud services, it took them some time to make those eligible, but they are indeed eligible. And think of it as, again, cloud service is necessary for the project. So something like a video conferencing software license, that can work under this grant. And remote instruction, that is a capital expenditure. Certain types of instructional content and packages, like anything that can be, like this says, purchased as a capital expenditure, can potentially be worked into the grant. But again, you want that to be part of the interactive session with the healthcare provider or with a professor. Like, this isn't a great grant for kind of preloaded asynchronous module-based learning, for instance. You really want that live, kind of experience, much like, I guess, what Megan and I can have right now. I know not everyone's on video, but like a face-to-face type of interaction. And like I said, technical assistance or training. So you're putting this technology into rural communities that might have not had this technology previously. You really want to make sure this technology is being well adopted and utilized. So you can work in training costs of, again, teaching people how to use this equipment in the most effective way. That could actually be worked into your budget. And then ineligible expenditures, a lot of things you see with a lot of other grants don't work under this one. So you can't get salary costs covered, for instance. No general medical supplies that aren't part of this interactive telemedicine session. There's no indirect costs that can be worked into this grant application. There's no evaluation required. So if based on your familiarity with other grants, some grants require grant evaluation where you basically have to prove that your project is successful and that you're meeting all your goals and such. You don't have to do that here. So they don't allow evaluation costs to be in the grant budget. And I know I've been talking about technology a lot, but even the technology has to be relevant. So again, it has to be necessary for what you're doing here for the interactive distance learning or telemedicine. I give the example of a computer a lot. A computer can be used for all kinds of things. Some of it could be live, distance learning or telemedicine, but it could be a whole bunch of other things. So if you're putting a computer in there, you really want to justify it and say, it's necessary. It's going to have a high quality webcam. If someone's going to use the computer in a shared setting, maybe a headset or, some kind of way for a person to have a really high quality interaction using that computer with somebody located elsewhere rather than just a computer that will be used generally, for administrative purposes. Now, jumping to competitiveness. I want to give you a high-level overview of this. This is going to be based on some numbers and things, but I think if you can hopefully have a high-level takeaway of like the key things that matter when you're thinking about setting up a project and when you're thinking about, if you have the choice of what locations you might include in the project, which locations to include and for what purposes. So since the grant is from the Rural Utility Service, of course, rurality is going to be the key thing here. They want to make sure that you're bringing services to rural communities. Every agency is going to define rural differently. the way the USDA defines rural is a town, city, or census designated place with populations under 20,000 people. And it also has to not be adjacent to a large urban area. So I live in Southern California. If you're, if you're a suburb of Los Angeles, and let's say you have 15,000 people, but you're still close to the, Los Angeles metro area, they might not define you as rural. The great thing is the USDA provides a map where you can look up the specific locations and see if they are urban adjacent. But essentially, I think a lot of times kind of common sense rules apply for this. If you're within a short driving distance of a big metro area, you're probably not going to be rural. But the places that you think of, in your county, in your state, in your community that are like, man, that's really far out there, that's probably going to count as rural under this grant program. Another piece that's really important too, that really heavily impacts your competitiveness is economic need. Now, what I'm walking you through right now are just the objective scoring metrics under this grant. So this grant has some objective scoring, and it's pretty binary. You either like meet this or you don't, or you get a point value here or you don't. There's also a narrative where you're going to talk about the communities that you're bringing services to. That's all subjectively scored. So when I say economic need here for competitiveness, this is based on one specific metric, but no, there are going to be so many ways you can also talk about economic need in your narrative. And there are some communities that objectively don't score great on this metric, but have a lot of other indicators of need and, can talk about many, many things in their narrative, and that's still going to be powerful, and that's still going to be very, very important. But for the objective scoring, the thing they care about is SAPE, which essentially measures the percentage of people who live in poverty in that county. So rurality, real quick, is based on the town or city. Economic need is also based on location, but it's going to be based on the county where that town or city or census designated place is. And this is the scoring kind of the thing they've used the last few years for determining your economic need score. And this measure differs greatly depending on where you are in the country. There are states where the highest SAPE is under 20. So there are states where the most points you can get on this metric is 10 points. And there are other states where a great number of counties have SAPE in the kind of 20 to 30 point mark. So it just depends on your area, depends on how large your counties are too. So larger counties are more likely to have pockets of high economic need, pockets of low economic need. And when you take the average, it might not score as high. But keep in mind, this is a federal grant, but they are going to consider where you are, and they want to try to spread the money pretty evenly. So again, if you're in a state where this metric is just not that high, but you're relatively high compared to others in your state, that's still going to be very competitive. Now, in a typical project where, again, you're either connecting rural entities to one another or you're connecting the rural entities to a hub, you're going to be scored based on the rurality and economic need of all of your service sites. We call them end user sites. So all the sites receiving the content, receiving the services. But both of these elements are going to be averaged across your sites. So that's where, you might have some locations that maybe don't score as well, but it might still make sense to include them because you have other locations that maybe get 40 points on the rurality metric or 20 or 30 points on SAPE. So as long as you're kind of averaging out and it's overall pretty competitive, you can still include locations that are like, oh, maybe that's not the most rural place, but it's eligible, so we can still include it in the project. I won't spend too much time on this, but just keep in mind if you are doing a project with services to people's homes or like services to the ambulance, like I said, like the mobile unit, that's going to be set up in a slightly different way. Usually all of your scoring in that case will be based on where the services originate. So that means that essentially the services will typically have to start from a rural area. So like if you're a rural clinic and want to reach patients at home, you can probably do that. And as long as you are rural yourselves. But if you're, the University of Arizona, you probably cannot reach people directly in their homes, but you would be able to connect with rural clinics, rural high schools, whoever it might be. It all depends on, again, where you are and who you're trying to bring services to. And we'd love to discuss this with you and help you figure this out for your projects and your initiatives. The last bit, just to keep in mind, is every year the grant will have extra points that it gives, special considerations, which are basically if your grant project meets a certain focus area, you can get extra points for the objective scoring. These are the special point categories for last year. And again, keep in mind, we won't know what these are until the grant guidance does come out. So this is one of those things that's a bit up in the air that you can't really predict. But on top of rurality and economic need, again, there might be some extra objective points you can get based on where you're bringing services to or the types of services you're bringing. And then just a few, I won't go through all of these, but I want to highlight here that there is a lot you can do with this grant program. So this is where I was saying, although what can go into your budget is pretty specific, what you can do with this grant in terms of the services that you're bringing. So what counts as distance learning and what counts as telemedicine is super, super broad. And we see innovative, new creative projects every year. So this is not a list of, an exhaustive list of all you can do. This is just meant to give you some ideas. And basically think of it as, on the distance learning side, it could be everything as formal as sharing a college course, with, let's say, high school students for dual enrollment, or it could be pretty informal education. So maybe you reaching out to rural schools and providing their parents, the parents of students with education around mental health, education around nutrition. It might not be a formal class, but you're sharing resources, you're sharing information. All of that counts as distance learning. Same thing on the telemedicine side. It could be a physical health session with a specialist. It could also be, pretty informal group-based behavioral health therapies. So that also, all of that works. And again, you can have a combo of the two. You might be looking to provide mental health services and education around mental health, just to give an example. And just to wrap up here, I want to leave you with a few immediate steps. And the first one, kind of a step zero that the grant people will always talk about, is if you're going after a federal grant, you want to make sure you have a SAM registration. You want to check on your organization's SAM registration. And if you have one, you want to make sure it's current and that certain things are met with that registration. But basically, this is a deal breaker. If you don't have the SAM registration, they don't let you apply for the RUST DLT grant. I think you literally can't click apply in grants.gov. So please check on your SAM registration. This is something our team also when we first have a conversation with somebody, first thing we bring up. If you need a SAM registration, if your organization doesn't currently have one, it's not too crazy to set it up, but it can take weeks for it to get approved. So something to move on immediately. I would say if you're interested in this cycle of the RUST DLT grant and your organization wants to serve as the applicant, you will need that SAM registration to apply. So definitely get going on that. But then other things, besides the paperwork requirement, think about your project vision. So like I said, you can do so much under this grant. What are you looking to do? Is it a distance learning project, telemedicine project? Does it have elements of both? Who's going to be involved? That's a big thing and that takes time. So both internally and externally, if you want to even include external folks, who is going to be involved in this project? You want to think through your location. So again, this grant really cares about locations. If you're, in a large urban area and you just don't have any rural partners currently, this might not be the grant for you. But maybe if you want to expand into rural areas and you look at this grant in the future, something to consider. But that's where, you like I said, any organization is eligible almost any, to apply, but you want to make sure your locations are eligible for receiving services. I think that's a really key thing and something to look into early. And the budget. So I list this as an immediate step because it does impact a lot of other things. So if you think, hey, we're only going to be able to supply a certain amount of match, maybe you know your max budget can only be $400,000 or $500,000. Maybe you wouldn't go after the full $1 million. Or again, if you're strained on your match, maybe you can get one of your project partners to contribute greater to the match. You want to be thinking about this because, again, it might impact the number of locations you can include, and it might also impact, can we make this be both a distance learning and telemedicine project our first time around, or do we want to narrow in on a particular focus because, we maybe can't get all the stuff in one grant application. Well, I think I went a little bit over my time, so hopefully Megan forgives me. But that is going to wrap up our REST DLT portion. Again, I'm going to be around. I'm going to be looking at the chat if you all have any questions, but we'll also stick around afterwards if you want to chat, and you can reach out to me to talk about this grant. I love talking about this grant. I'm not even kidding. So please reach out if you want to know more. And now I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Well, thank you, Vicki. I am going to start out with a little break for everyone. I recently received 150 joke cards, so I'm going to start off this with a joke, which I'll address to Vicki. Vicki, why did the dinosaur cross the road?
It didn't have roads then. This joke does not make sense.
I mean, well, the answer is quite similar. So the answer is because the chicken wasn't born yet.
Pretty good.
Nor were there any roads. So really, we should write to this company. But anyway, a great joke that I hope everyone carries with them for the rest of the day. But I am here to talk about the Digital Equity Act, some of the programs that are coming from that, as well as some of the broadband programs that we have coming up, and a little bit of a refresh on those. So next slide, Vicki. So first, setting the stage, we have the Digital Equity Act, but what is digital equity? What do we mean when we use this term? So this definition is from the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and they define digital equity as the condition in which all individuals and communities have the information, technology, capacity needed for full participation in our society, democracy, and economy. And so on the side here, you can see what are some of these elements that fall into that definition. It includes, first off, having a broadband connection, having internet. It includes having the devices to use internet. It includes access to the training to know how to use those devices. In addition to that, technical support. So what happens if something is wrong with your device? You can't have that full digital equity if you don't have access to something or to someone to be able to troubleshoot. And then again, having applications designed for digital equity, right? So when we think about, sorry, these are clanking. I have to take my medals off, guys. Do we have websites that are accessible for all readers, right? Is the print able to be large enough to fit on a screen? So not only is it the devices and the know-how and the support, but making sure what we're interacting with is accessible for everyone. So that is digital equity. Next slide. So there are a lot of people who have been working on this for a while. But there have historically and still are many challenges in achieving this digital equity that we're looking for. A big one, insufficient infrastructure. So this is, how this combines with what I do in our broadband space is that you can't have digital equity if you have outdated or lacking broadband. If the infrastructure isn't there because of the implementation costs, right? These are all barriers that a lot of these digital equity champions are facing. With that, poor device quality, kind of coming back, if you had a program from, as Vicki said, a much earlier DLT perhaps, And those computers, those tablets might be outdated now, right? Technology moves so fast. At the time, we thought it was the best, but advancements, mean it can't handle what we're trying to have them do now. So that's another big challenge, is poor device quality. Again, this digital literacy or awareness. And so when we talk about this digital equity is also a buzzword. So you have some communities who they hear the term equity and they kind of freeze up, right? So how do we get communities aware of this work without having that freeze up reaction, right? That's another challenge that needs to be overcome in some cases. And then again, a poor integration of resources, right? So we talk about, or I will be talking about, broadband funding, but is that then aligning with the people doing this work? And when we think about a community, there's probably libraries, medical centers, all sorts of entities that are doing this. Are they lining up as well? Are we maximizing our resources? So kind of that communication, I think, is a challenge, we see in many programs, but certainly in a lot of the DE work that has been happening. These are 4 kind of main themes that we see as real challenges. So recognizing this, we have the Digital Equity Act programs. So there are 3 buckets of funding that come from the Digital Equity Act. The first one, the State Digital Equity Planning Grant. So this is a formula grant, which meant states got a certain amount of money to complete this activity. They had to develop a digital equity plan. If you're tracking in this arena, you might have seen states, they're continuously publishing their plans. They're open for public comment. So I'd absolutely encourage, check if your state has released their digital equity plan, take a look, give feedback. If it's not capturing things that you see in your community, absolutely let the states know. I will say a lot of them, from what I've seen, I haven't read all of them, have done a really fantastic job in talking to communities and trying to capture as many of the pain points and where things stand, and then how they're hoping to address that. One of the ways then they're addressing that is that they're going to open state digital equity capacity grants. So again, this is another formula grant that has $1.44 billion that's going to be split amongst all the states and territories, so they can hold annual grant programs. And these grant programs will be then to meet a lot of the needs that they identify in their digital equity plans. So these will be run through each state. They'll look a little different with the requirements, but there will be some things that are similar across all of them, and mainly achieving those goals that they put in their digital equity plans. That's for 5 years. Then there's the Digital Equity Competitive Grant. So this is going to be run through the NTIA. NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, they are also distributing these first 2 grants, giving it to the states who will then do the work. This last one, they are going to host the grant program. So this has $1.25 billion. It's a discretionary program, which means folks across the US can apply. It's going to be competitive. And $2.5 billion looks like a lot, but it goes again over 5 years, which means each year, assuming they do it equally, could be only about 125 million. So it is a smaller amount, but we do have 5 years to kind of see this funding come and hopefully do some really great things. Eligible applicants for this program will be political subdivisions of states, tribes, nonprofits, community anchor institutions, CAIs, local education agencies, and entities that do workforce development. And the one I want to focus on here is CAIs, right? I know Vicki was just talking about medical centers that could apply for DLT. Medical centers are absolutely community anchor institutions, especially if we're thinking in rural areas, right? So a community anchor institution can absolutely be an eligible applicant here. A lot of centers do fall into that broad category that is defined in the Act, and they spell it all out. The only one to note here is that institutes of higher education are not eligible. And again, this is written into law, so unlikely that they will change that and make them allowable. Next slide. So what can you do with this? I won't read this verbatim. It's a lot of words, but kind of what Vicki was saying earlier, you can be absolutely creative in this. Wherever your imagination goes that will solve the issue of digital inequity is probably an eligible use here. So, you know, you can make devices available, you can make training available, you can do skills, you can do things to increase adoption of broadband, and basically then that last point, undertake any other project and activity that the assistant secretary thinks is consistent with the purpose, right? So that's kind of a big catch-all at the bottom there, which really tells us you can be as creative as you can if your goal is you know, a digital equity matter. Some smaller points, administrative expenses in this will only be 10%. There's going to be a 4-year implementation period, and the federal share may not exceed 90%. So that's going to mean you're going to need a 10% match in some way or another. Again, right now, we don't have a active guidance for this. So these rules are just coming directly from the law that was passed, outlining what it's going to look like. Next slide. So when is it happening? Right? As I was saying, we right now only have the law. Where we're at, the NTIA is going to open these capacity grants for states. Spring 2024 is our guess, based on this timeline of what we've seen, what we've been hearing, the little scuttlebutt in the community. We're thinking spring 2024. The states will then say, okay, here's what we want to do with our grant program. The states then in the summer and fall will get the money to open these programs. And then the NTIA has said that, I think it's something within 1 month, they must also open their competitive grant program. So you're going to have simultaneous programs probably between state and federal. So certainly something to think about is that there's going to be multiple opportunities happening at once there. Then given the timeline of what we anticipate application period being, how long it takes to review, we're hopeful then to see awards in winter of this year or maybe beginning of next year. So definitely closer to the timeline of when this might happen than when I last talked about this, which is exciting. We're getting closer and closer. But it does mean that, you know, spring is kind of soon. So it's time to start thinking about this. Next slide. Okay, so Vicki, I did this purposefully, maybe to keep you on your toes. This is the wrong slide for the wrong part. I flip-flopped them. If we're able to do slide 25, or yes. we can just move on. We can come back to them.
Okay.
Okay, we'll keep going. Anyway, I'm just making sure that Vicki's still listening to me.
No, I still am. My key wasn't clicking, so there we go.
Okay, perfect. So this is what to think about now, knowing the timeline for the digital equity programs. What to think about now, coordination, right? So competitive applications are going to have multiple partners. There's going to be a lot of people going for these funds. And so, you know, getting all your partners in line, even if it's internal folks, can be a challenge. So definitely start having the discussions about these programs now and what you're thinking you can do. Kind of related resources. As I said earlier, this work has typically been understaffed, underfunded. Capacity is an issue. So again, start now and then also think about how you can overcome maybe some of your barriers, you know, with getting a grant done. So Janet definitely mentioned some organizations that do grant writing, that can help with this. You know, that's one barrier removed in putting this. So start thinking about what you need to fill and how you can get creative with your resources that you have. The next, program creation. So what we're saying here is stuff is not enough, right? So you can't ask for just, oh, we would like some computers. is why do you need computers? What are you going to do with the computers? What is the program with them, right? So having a full, robust program or activity, well thought out of what you're going to do is going to be critical. Stuff is not enough. So having a structured, comprehensive grant that you can apply for. Another thing I want to point out is state recognized tribes. So the federal program from NTIA will not be eligible for state recognized tribes. It will only be federally recognized tribes. However, in the talking we've done with many states, they are going to open their programs to state recognized tribes. Now, a lot of these are on the East Coast and the South, so not sure of our demographic here. Even if you're not there, reaching out to some of these states that do have only state recognized tribes and saying, hey, we support that, making your program open to state recognized tribes, because there is absolutely a need for many tribes. And it is an unfortunate situation when sometimes they get left behind, not being federally recognized for all sorts of reasons. It happens, but certainly pointing this out and encouraging states that have recognized tribes to list them as eligible applicants. So now we can go back to the BEAD intro. So the BEAD program, Broadband Equity Access and Deployment. So the next slide, remind me about it. So if you've had any kind of touch point on broadband, BEAD is all people are talking about. It is the hot thing. It has been for a few years now because it has a very long timeline of what's being done with it. Basically, it is a $42.45 billion program to expand high-speed internet access across states and territories. The money from this program will be going to states, and they have a set amount. They already know how much they're going to be receiving. The states are then going to open grant programs for people to apply to build broadband internet. So it is at the stage of things have started coming together. States have had a plethora of things that they need to complete before they can even get these funds. And I have such respect for the state offices that have been doing this because it is very demanding to get this, but it'll be important money coming in to, again, bridge this digital divide, part of which is that digital equity we talked about. So timeline for this. Where are we? So right now, many states are doing a challenge process, pre-application process. I realize my late winter should be late winter 2023, spring 2024. Anyway, point being, what this process is that states are putting out a map of saying, here's where we think every single serviceable location, so community anchor institution, house, business, here are the ones that don't have qualifying broadband, which they deem as 100 megabits per second over 20 megabits per second. So download, upload. What they're opening to is service providers, cities, towns, municipalities, counties can then go in and challenge the state's map and say, you said this is served, we disagree. Or you say this is unserved and we disagree. And there's a whole bunch of things that they have to do. This is a 90-day process. It has to be 90 days according to the guidelines for states to allow people to challenge what has internet and what doesn't. So after this is done, after the states have completed this, then they can open some grant programs. So we're estimating summer 2024 for the states that are kind of on top of it. There's again, states and territories, there's 56 of these coming through the NTIA. The NTIA has to review and then approve. So some states are ahead of the game, some are a little behind. What we've put here as our dates is kind of the in the middle. So hopefully late summer 2024, we'll see some of these programs start to open. And then applications going in through the fall of 2024. And then maybe getting those grants out in this winter, beginning of next year. So I have made many a timeline for BEAD, and it continually changes. Sometimes I'm kind of right, sometimes I'm very, very wrong. So definitely take this timeline with, a grain of salt, that we're tracking as best we can, but, a lot is up in the air and a lot of dependencies. So next slide. Going back to the slide that I put there. Awesome. So what to think about now for BEAD? That location challenge part I talked about. Again, there's only a few kinds of entities that can challenge that status, and you may or may not be one of them. If you are not one of them, you can coordinate with your city or your town or your county to do so, or even a local internet service provider. So they have to be the ones to submit the challenge. But if you look on the map and you say it's wrong, get in touch with them and have them submit that with you or for you. Know where you stand. So an important thing to know is that if you are a community anchor institution, I mentioned that qualifying 100 over 20, but if you're a CAI, you are required to have 1 gigabit symmetrical service as a part of this program. You have to. So if you don't currently have that, it's mandated that, once you get served, it has to be at that speed. So making sure that you're kind of aware of what you should be getting in these circumstances. Think about partners. So again, you may or may not be an eligible applicant for this, but how can you support your town, your county, your local provider in getting this? So thinking of your letters of support, thinking of a community benefit agreement. These are all going to be scored highly or considered highly for a lot of the states. So making sure that you're supporting and partnering where you can if you are not an entity providing service. And then again, think of the benefits, right? So if you're doing a community benefit agreement, what can you ask of the service provider? Sometimes, you can get free internet service for 2 years. As part of that. So definitely make sure you're having those discussions. And then I think I have no more slides.
I think we have
the resources slide. Absolutely. So you'll see I had a definition earlier. National Digital Inclusion Alliance, they are doing a great job in tracking things and having resources. The Office of Educational Technology, NTIA, and obviously USDA RUSDLT website.
They have some great stuff on their website. Anyway, I think if you have questions, like I said, please reach out to me. They, like, for instance, on their website, they have the SAFE data that was used last year, but probably for this new application round, they might be using the newest SAFE data, which is available on the census website. But if you just need some help figuring out, like, what database do I look at, would love to help you with that. So please, don't hesitate to reach out. I'll jump here just so you have our contact info. But Mariah, I think we can do closing remarks, but also open it up to questions.
I also have more jokes, so.
We have a lot more jokes.
I just wanted to thank you both so much for your time. It didn't look like any questions were in the chat, but we'll wait just another minute if they want to. And then I'm sure you'll have people reaching out directly to you for those specific questions that they may have. Perfect. Yeah, it looks like we're good. I'll let you two have the rest of your day, and thank you everyone for joining us.